This is the Ask Faleskini podcast, where the modern economy is discussed from a skeptic's perspective. Mr. Faleskini helps you distinguish what is sustainable in our economy and what isn't. Not everything that glitters is gold, and not all mud is dirty. The podcaster Mr. Faleskini provides no-nonsense advice. He had it all, lost it all, went bankrupt multiple times, and is now attempting to come back from zero with sustainable growth. There are numerous coaches and preachers on the internet that preach about positive thinking and how life is all roses if you just care to see it that way. Well, Mr. Faleskini is definitely not one of them. We recommend you ask Faleskini to keep it real. He discusses the darker side of the current economic reality, the side that's more important for your personal and business finance. His first intention is to help you keep what you already have. Not to be a complete party pooper, Mr. Faleskini will also hint at the earning opportunities in the economy today. In order to please the almighty algorithm, please like, share, and subscribe. And now it's time to start taking notes. The mic goes to the podcaster, the one and only Mr. Faleskini.
Welcome to the Ask Faleskini podcast with a guest. I'm proud to present Duncan Bhaskaran Brown from Oxford, UK. Duncan has gone his fair share of overindulgence. Strictly speaking, he's drunk more than his fair share of wine and eat more than his fair share of the cake. Along the way, he found himself in some interesting places, like on stage with S Club, a stint as a major of his hometown, and Morris dancing in Westminster Abbey. After 20 years of overdoing it, he cleaned up his act and trained with the Easyway clinic, the world's most successful stop smoking service. Now he spends his time helping people push overindulgence out of their life. Duncan, please tell us more about yourself. What is your story?
Oh, firstly, thanks for having me along. As you kind of hinted, my story is one that began with an awful lot of overindulgence, and at the moment I've found a nice place where I've got all of the peace and the calm and the energy and the joy. So yeah, my story is one of transformation, and now I try and help other people achieve transformations like that.
That is great. You also wrote a book about overindulgence, or how to get over indulgences. Would you care to tell us more about your book? What is it about?
So, partly it's about overindulgence, but mostly it's about me, isn't it? Because I'm a bit like that. So it's kind of my journey. I started off like as a little kid. I started eating chocolate because that is a socially acceptable drug, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And I used it to comfort me, to fill a hole, or that's what I thought at the time, to help me get through the stresses and strains of life. And of course, as I grew up a little bit, I discovered alcohol, and you can guess where that one went. Started drinking too much, but I managed to keep hold of the bad eating as well, and I started smoking. Yeah, took my fair share of drugs as well. So got myself into a situation where I really wasn't very healthy. Ironically, I suppose I was functioning at quite a high level. As you say, I was mayor of my hometown. I was doing very well in local government. But I kind of look back on those days now, and I sort of think if I'd really been acting at my full potential, if I'd found the place where I am now earlier, what could I have achieved?
But do you think that alcohol and chocolate and all these other addictions hold you back? Do you think that was something that did not enable you to reach your full potential? Or is that also, because you're still very young, for all these experiences that you have, is that just something that was part of your life at that time?
That's a very interesting question. I mean, there's a load in that. I mean, certainly in terms of the way it held me back. I mean, you can talk about the obvious kind of physical aspect of it. So alcohol ruins your sleep. it causes a lot of other neurological problems. I'm not going to go into the whole brain chemistry of it, but it messes up the balance of chemicals in your brain. So it means literally your brain doesn't work as well if you regularly drink alcohol. It also affects your relationships. It makes you make decisions which are less than stellar, and you make bad decisions, that causes problems in your life. So, in that kind of very obvious way, it was holding me back. But the longer it's been since I stopped drinking, and the more I talk about these things, and the more I think about it, the more I realize some really kind of subtle mechanisms are at play. So, I mean, you mentioned that I've written a book. That was my third book, and it's no coincidence that they've all been published since I stopped drinking. I have always been a writer. I wrote all through my 20s, and the thing is, I never showed any of my stuff to anybody. And they are literally still in the metaphorical writer's drawer in my desk, gathering dust. Whether they're any good or not, I don't know. But the point is, I never found out because I never showed them to anybody. And it was only after I stopped drinking that I kind of developed the confidence and removed all of the anxiety and the fear and all of that junk, that I was able to actually get my work out there and put it in front of people. And, you say what you like about books, but the ones that make the difference to people are the ones that they actually read.
Yeah, that is correct. You are also a Morris dancer.
Yes, I am.
Did you start with Morris dance after your wildlife period or before?
Oh, no. It was, I kind of started dancing because there's a big connection between Morris dancing and alcohol. That generally we dance in pubs or close to pubs. There's a lot of beer and Morris dancing. So when I started, I fitted in quite naturally. It was like, great, I've now actually got an excuse to start drinking at 10 in the morning, and I mean, I hung around with a lot of people that actually drank the same amount as me, and that was very pleasant. It dampens down the cognitive dissonance a little bit, doesn't it? So I started out Morris dancing, and I thought it was all about drinking. And then when I stopped drinking, I was a little bit nervous about it, whether I'd still enjoy it, whether I'd still want to do it. Would I feel uncomfortable in those situations? And what I discovered was I actually like dancing. I actually like the blokes that I dance with. I actually like the community. I like the sense of tradition. That was another kind of revelation for me. It was like, it was never really about the alcohol. It was never really about the booze. It was always about the people. It was always about the activity, and it was always about the tradition and the community. It really had nothing to do with alcohol.
Okay. How should business people distinguish between a celebration of victory or special achievement and overindulgence?
Yeah, I mean, that is a particularly interesting line to walk these days. And my experience, I suppose, is that things are getting better, but they're getting better from a fairly bad place. I mean, the default setting for any celebration, certainly in the UK, it involves alcohol. It's almost like you can't celebrate anything without alcohol. Even if you do something enjoyable, like kite surfing or go-karting or paintballing, you go to the pub afterwards and you have a few beers afterwards. And it's very, very ingrained in our culture. So it's not surprising that a lot of businesses and a lot of business leaders consider a way to reward their employees as giving them alcohol, which is fine until you consider the fact that more and more people are embracing sober living. More and more people don't drink for religious reasons. And actually, a lot of younger people, they see it for what it is, and they don't even start in the first place. So I think the idea that you would reward your employees with alcohol is kind of out of date and almost quite dangerous. You have the potential to really upset and offend people. And as I say, I think it is improving, but probably improving from not a great point of view. And that's just alcohol. I mean, sugar, what do? Your team does well, you buy them a cake. That's great. Unless, of course, anybody in your team is, on a diet. or trying to lose weight. And I've seen it in various workplaces. Several of them are actually based around health. I did some work for the National Health Service in this country a little while ago, and they ate more sweets than anybody else. There was every time they'd just be bringing in the sweets, and it was this kind of this way of rewarding and celebrating things, but it's not a reward. And the way I think about it is, if you're tempted to give your employees alcohol or sugar, then consider this. Would you be tempted to give them cocaine, cigarettes? That wouldn't look good, would it? Nobody would do that. And but actually, for me, sugar and alcohol is just as bad as cocaine and cigarettes. And for more and more people, I think that's becoming the case. So I think business leaders have got to really think about that and be really, really careful. And if you want my advice, fruit. Everybody loves fruit. You can't go wrong. It's the best way to celebrate. Buy a mango.
Okay. In UK culture is also still, if there's a small business going on, let's talk things over a pint of beer. That is still a case, I believe. And let's go to a bar and discuss when will you supply it? Can you give me some additional discounts and similar things? What should business people do instead of that? Should they order something else in the bar? How should they act in this circumstance?
I mean, I see where the tension comes from, because I've been in a lot of situations, and I know that particularly I spent a lot of my life involved in politics. And the thing with politics is, yes, discussions happen in the actual meeting, but a lot of it happens informally and a lot of it happens socially. Mm-hmm. And if your social life entirely revolves around alcohol and you want to remove yourself from that situation, then potentially you can miss out on some of those important decisions. So I get the tension, but I mean, for me, I don't have any problem going to the pub. I'm happy to go to the pub. I'll go and sit in the pub all evening with you if you want, and you can drink as much beer as you like. I'll drink orange juice. Well, I'll have one orange juice. Nobody's going to drink 8 pints of orange juice. That would just be awful, wouldn't it? I might have a cup of tea. I might just end up drinking sparkling water, whatever. I'll cope. It doesn't bother me. I don't want to drink anymore. So the fact that you're drinking doesn't bother me. And if we're negotiating, I'm quite happy that you're drinking, because it's not going to put you in a good position from a negotiating point of view, is it? Well, we're doing exactly what I want.
That is really good. So we already touched about that, but I will still be a bit pushy. Where do you think is the line between party or let's say business manners and addiction? How should business people sense this when they are getting overboard with alcohol or sugar? Or
that is a really good question. I mean, there are a lot of different ways of approaching that. You can talk about dependence, and that's probably my favorite way of thinking about it. Mm-hmm. You can talk about neurological structures, you can talk about cravings, you can talk about all of these kind of things. But I think if you feel like you depend on something, then you have a problem with it. And that you've got to be quite careful. You've got to really think about that, because it's too easy to just say, well, I don't depend on alcohol to get out of bed in the morning, so I don't have a problem. That's like true, but all that really means is you don't depend on it to get through the day. So you can get through the day without a drink. Can you get through the evening without a drink? Do you depend on it to get through social events? Do you depend on it to reduce your stress? Do you depend on it to navigate complex relationships? There are a lot of different variations of what dependency might look like. And if you feel like you depend on something for anything like that, dealing with emotions, running away from your problems, coping with things, then that, I think, is really the red flag.
You were also the stop smoking therapist.
I steal about £10 million a year from the tobacco industry. That's the way I like to think of it, anyway.
Okay, so you're just increasing your market share of non-smoking.
Well, no, just trying to decrease theirs. That's all.
Okay, so what I'm trying to get to is, would you agree that the first phase with any addiction or indulgence, as you call it, is the denial? And most people are in denial before they even recognize that they have an addiction.
Yeah. I think there's a lot in that. Most of the people that I meet, it doesn't take that long for them to get to the point where they realize that actually they do have a problem. So there's kind of it's always a very surface level thing, denial. It doesn't really take that much to get past the denial. What I've found is enormously effective. It's the same with most business relationships, isn't it? If you build rapport with somebody first, if they start to know who you are, if they start to like you and they start to trust you, then you can do business together, can't you? And that's all I do. I build rapport with people, and I try and point out to them that they might feel like they're alone, they might feel like they're very different, but I've been there before. I haven't lived your life. I don't know everything that's gone on, but a lot of the themes that recur in your life, a lot of the problems that you have are exactly the same problems that I had, exactly the same problem that millions of people have had, and they found a way out. And that's all we do together is we kind of find a way out. So yeah, I mean, it starts with denial, but luckily denial is pretty thin. And then on the other side of that is this increasing self-awareness. And once you get to the real awareness and really seeing alcohol or cigarettes or junk food for what it really is, that's a wonderful point. It's a wonderful starting point for changing your life, because self-awareness is one of the most important skills, I think.
Mm-hmm. What do you think about cigars getting more and more popular in business circles as something of a prestige? Isn't that smoking as well?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Anything with nicotine in. So I had a conversation with a guy earlier who stopped smoking, started vaping, and he hates vaping now. So he's thinking about going on to the chewing gum. And I'm like, dude, just don't do it. It's all nicotine. If it's got nicotine in it. So if it's a vape, pipe, cigar, gum, cigarette, heats, snoozy bags, the ones you shove up there, whatever, chewing tobacco, whatever. If it's got nicotine in it, it's basically going to do you a massive disservice. But cigars in particular, I mean, that is the biggest trick the devil ever pulled, that, like, why do people pay for cigars? I smoked enough cigars in my time, and I can assure you they are bloody horrible. Like, I mean, I am somebody who knows poison. I have done most of the drugs going. I have drunk all of the cheapest, nastiest booze that's out there. But right up there in terms of genuinely hateful are cigars. I don't know why anybody pays huge amounts of money for them. Well, actually, I kind of do. I mean, it's a status thing, isn't it? It's look at my cigar. It's bigger than your cigar. It's a bit pathetic if you get down to it. Yeah, it's the same addiction, just in a more expensive packaging.
Is there any specific trigger or event or maybe therapy that helps people stop their self-destructive behavior?
That's interesting. So there's definitely an idea that largely comes from Alcoholics Anonymous, AA, that you need to hit rock bottom. You need to get to the point where everything is falling apart and you can go no further down before you change. I encourage people not to do that, because that's very damaging to your health, your relationships, your employment status, or your business if you run one. Simply realizing that you might have a bit of an issue, that is enough. If you feel like that, do something. You can get in touch with me and I'll try and help you. Or you can go to AA, you can go to Weight Watchers, you can go to the Easyway. I don't care, but do something. Because if you feel like there's a problem, there almost certainly is. And the sooner you start to deal with it, the better.
Okay. What can a person do on his or her own? And when do they need help? When would you recommend to find a coach or a therapist?
I mean, I take a kind of coaching point of view. So what I try and do is I help people to think through the situation that they are in. Now, it is possible to do that on your own. It's much harder. If you're on your own, then there are quite a lot of good books out there. There's one called Get Over-Indulgence by a guy called Duncan Bhaskaran Brown. But anything written by Alan Carr, the Easyway, the Stop Smoking thing, This Naked Mind by Annie Grace, William Porter's Alcohol Explained, Craig Beck. There's loads and loads of really good books out there. So if you're on your own and you really want to do it on your own, just get a book. What's it going to cost you? $10?
We're gonna include the link to your book in the description, just for our listeners.
And I'd be happy if you bought my book, but I'd be even happier if you did something. So on your own, yes, I think that there are books, there's online programs, there's podcasts. You can get yourself educated, and you can get free that way. Personally, I've seen much more success working one-to-one with people or in groups, and helping people to kind of think through their beliefs around whatever they've got a problem with, whether it's alcohol, cigarettes, food, thinking through those beliefs and really getting to grips with them, because those beliefs are the rock on which your thoughts are based. Once you've sorted out your beliefs, you can start to manage your thoughts. You can think about your thinking. And then if you can do both of those, sort out the beliefs, you've sorted out the thoughts, trust me, the action is easy. The behavior is the easy bit. Get the beliefs right, get the thoughts right, the actions will follow. You can do it on your own, you can do it in a book. People all over the world have, but I think it's easier working either one-to-one or in a group. And there's lots of good groups out there.
Okay, what do you think about hypnosis as a one of a possible solution to the problem, or possible therapy for the addiction? Would you say that is something that you would recommend? What is the method that you are using to help people with their addiction?
So the method that I use was sort of based on the science of behavior change, and it's about attacking those beliefs using a thought management system, and then the actions follow on from that. Hypnotherapists tend to have a pretty poor success rate with around alcohol and smoking in particular, because hypnotherapists don't tend to understand smoking and drinking. They're very particular areas, and there are very few people in the field who make an awful lot of sense who haven't been through it. I'm not saying nobody who hasn't been through it, they're not allowed to help. It's just generally all of the people who I respect, the voices, Jack Trimpey, Gabor Mate, Alan Carr, Annie Grace, all of these people, they've been through it and they understand it both from the kind of theoretical point of view and from the experience point of view. And my experience with hypnotherapists, I never tried to stop using a hypnotherapist, but just knowing a few as people is then that they haven't got the experience. So they don't really go about it in the right way. They don't necessarily know what bits to attack and what bits not to. And even somebody who I've got an enormous amount of time for, BJ Fogg, who wrote Tiny Habits, he runs the Stanford Behavior Change Lab, massively respected behavior change expert. I don't think he quite understands behavior change in terms of addiction and things like that. I mean, he's close, but I think because he's never had the experience, he says a few things that just guessing. Don't gel with my experience.
So there's also a term I really hate, that so-called recreational use of marijuana. Would you agree that this is also an addiction? It's not just if it's recreational, then it's not an addiction.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things like social smokers, casual drinkers. I've never met a casual smoker. Or, they're all in it as bad as themselves. Now, marijuana, I mean, it affects your dopamine system. Ergo, it is an addictive substance. That's not really up for discussion. That's pretty much a scientific fact. However, I don't know what the percentages are on marijuana, but I suspect not well, I know that not everybody that smokes marijuana becomes addicted to it, in the way that not everybody that drinks alcohol becomes addicted to it. Some drugs are worse than others in terms of the percentages of people that get trapped in them. Smoking and alcohol happen to be pretty bad, probably because they're more socially acceptable. But marijuana is definitely an addictive drug, and therefore, if you keep doing it, you will become addicted to it. It doesn't really matter who you are. If you stick enough spliffs in the Dalai Lama's mouth, he's going to become a drug addict, because it's the drug, it's not the individual. So yeah, I think marijuana is potentially quite a dangerous drug. However, contrasted to alcohol, it probably comes off reasonably well. I mean, that's not a good. I'm not saying go and do it. I'm just saying if you look at the studies, it does a lot less harm to society and harm to the individuals than alcohol or heroin or crystal meth. Those are the three that have the highest amount of harm to society and harm to the user.
What do you think about really big tolerance towards cocaine in business circles?
Yeah, that's something that worries me a lot. I mean, cocaine is something that has increased massively over the last sort of 30, 40 years. It's become cheaper and it's become more prevalent. And I was chatting to a guy, a very interesting bloke, and very ethical. He's all about climate change. He's all about fair trade. He's all about workers' rights. And he does a couple of grams of coke at the weekend. And I just like, do you realize what you're actually doing? You drink fair trade wine and then you snort cocaine, which is, it only comes from one place, and that's nasty criminal gangs. Yeah. So yeah, you've got to think. I mean, I'm no fan of the tobacco industry. I'm no fan of the alcohol industry, but at least they are paying some taxes, and at least they are operating within the letter of the law, if not within any moral kind of compass, whereas any kind of illicit drug, I don't quite see how you can be committed to being an entrepreneur and being an ethical business person and take cocaine. It's just
would you agree that legalization of all drugs and would improve situation, then people would be less drawn towards this because it's not illegal, and there would also be a better distribution, the lower price, and also as you mentioned, the companies would pay taxes, and a lot of groups would lose their influence because it would be legal, the prices would drop, and then they would not have so much money to influence either politicians or police or any other.
Yeah. I mean, if I was going to be, I am controversial. So here's a controversial idea for you.
Mm-hmm.
If we'd have legalized heroin, it would have improved Afghanistan far more than invading it.
Mm-hmm.
Because, we had soldiers in Afghanistan for knocking on 20 years, and it's still the world's largest producer of heroin. It's insane. Look, I mean, first and foremost, you've got to accept it's a complicated policy decision, but mm-hmm. I think there's a lot of bright signs from places like Portugal, where they have taken not so much a tolerant view of distribution, but a more tolerant view of addicts, and rather than criminalizing them, giving them a way of existing until they get to the point where they want to change, and then supporting them when they want to change. I think that's a far more compassionate approach than punishing addicts. I think that there is no there's no way that the current system that really hammers addicts and sends them to prison is good for anybody. In terms of distribution, I mean, yeah, I'd like to see it all on a more level playing field, because if we were going to legalize marijuana or any other drug, we would regulate it, and we would regulate it properly, and you would only be able to buy it from certain places. You'd only be able to buy it at certain times. You wouldn't be able to get some bloke on a moped to deliver it to you in the middle of the night. And I've had clients who, have been struggling with alcohol, and part of their problem is that there is never an off button to alcohol anymore. You want to order 2 bottles of wine in the middle of the night, you can. It will cost you a lot of money because some guy on a moped is going to drive to the 24-hour supermarket and then drive it round your house and charge you, twice the price for it. But if you're addicted enough, that doesn't matter, does it? Mm-hmm. So I would love to see more regulation of alcohol, tightening of the sales of alcohol, and if we were therefore going to legalize marijuana, maybe that would make us rethink how we sell alcohol.
Mm-hmm. What is your opinion of ancient methods? How they we touched a bit. You explained that there was a guy that went from smoking to vaping to chewing gum. But the ancient, not ancient, but old methods, they substitute one addiction for another addiction. Usually that was alcohol for extreme sport. What do you think about this method?
Yeah, so I mean, broadly speaking, that's the idea of harm reduction. So you take something that's very bad for you and you replace it with something that's less bad for you. Now, I can see the case for that when we're talking about heroin. As I mentioned earlier, heroin is one of the worst drugs in terms of the impact on society and the impact on the individual. So if you can take heroin addicts and you can put them on a stable dose of methadone, that's going to improve society and it's going to improve the lives of that individual. That's good. However, if you take a smoker and you get them vaping, you've done nothing. That is not harm reduction, because nobody really knows the long-term impact of vaping, do they? I mean, there's some studies coming out that are suggesting it's not as bad as smoking, but hey, there's not that much stuff in life that's as bad as smoking. And I think that the problem is if you're saying, well, don't smoke, chew gum, take patches, vape, whatever, you're still keeping people addicted to nicotine. And all you've done is you've given them a slightly smaller hammer to hit themselves in the head with. And the point is, stop hitting yourself in the head with a hammer. I mean, it would be sensible if stopping smoking was hard, but it's really not. Stopping smoking is incredibly easy.
Yeah, for experts like you. But I had a guy that said stop smoking is really easy. I've done it 100 times before.
Well, yeah, I mean, in that sense, I did stop drinking every day. I literally would wake up in the morning and say, I'm never going to drink again. And then come sort of 7, 8 o'clock, it was a different matter, wasn't it? But no, I mean, I think you don't need anything special. I'm nothing special, Peter. I'm genuinely nothing special. If you don't believe me, just ask my wife.
No, I think you're just playing it small. You.
No. I'm just a normal guy. There's nothing magic about what I did. I just changed my beliefs. I changed the thought process that sat on top of those beliefs, and then that made changing my action really, really, really easy. And I know that anybody can do it because I work with a lot of people, and I found a lot of people have found their way out, and they found it as easy as I have. I mean, I know why people say it's hard, because there's all of this kind of society. There's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of illusions out there in society about how difficult it is. You hear people saying that stopping smoking is harder than stopping cocaine or heroin. Now, luckily, I've never had to give up heroin, but stopping smoking's easy.
Okay. I take that from you because you're an expert in that. What is your take on sugar addiction and fast food addiction? How should business people go about it? Because if you're driving, the easiest thing to do is just buy a Snickers at the shop and just continue driving and so on, or take a can of Coca-Cola and just drink it and there's a lot of sugar in it, or just eat a sandwich, or go to McDonald's and eat a burger. What's your take? How should business people avoid this? addiction? What should they do about it?
I really love the way you've phrased that, and I'm going to get back to you stopping off for a Snickers in a second. But the first thing I want to point out is having, I've done my fair share of drink, drugs, smoking, eating junk food, listening to terrible music, and it all works in exactly the same way. Smoking, drinking, junk food. For me, it all worked in exactly the same way, and I stopped doing it all in exactly the same way. So the solution is the same. It doesn't really matter what the problem is. But I think you hit on a really interesting point. So you stop at a shop and you buy a Snickers. Right? If you're stopping at a shop and buying a Snickers, you don't have a diet problem, you have an organizational problem.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you'd have just taken enough food with you, you wouldn't have to stop at the shop to buy that Snickers, would you? You'd have had an apple. You'd have had a banana, whatever. You'd have had some sort of healthy snack. And I think that's the problem, that we've been kind of lulled into this sense of convenience, that we don't need to plan our meals because we can just buy food wherever you go. Unfortunately, it's quite hard to buy good food wherever you go. You can buy food-shaped products, can't you?
Mm-hmm.
But they're just packed full of fat, salt, sugar. Those are the only ingredients in most of the stuff that you can buy in petrol stations. And I know, I get the problem. I do a lot of driving myself. I try really hard to be strategic about it so that I know, right, day after tomorrow, I'm going to London. I'll leave at 6 a.m. And if I get back at 7:30 at night, I'll be happy. So I'm going to be out for a long period of time. I'm going to take a bag of food and I won't be hungry, and I won't need to stop to get that Snickers because I've just planned it. And I think that's the thing. Cooking's not hard. Eating healthy's not hard. You know what healthy food looks like. You know what junk looks like. It's just we don't organize our lives sufficiently. We don't plan sufficiently. So we end up having to get things on the fly, and we buy what is available. And unfortunately, is what is available, it's junk, isn't it?
Yeah, mostly. There's another huge addiction I would like to touch on, and it's much harder to tackle because it's in a medical system. What is your opinion about prescription drugs addiction? And it's basically now so over 50, probably every second person is already on a prescription drugs. What's your take on this addiction? How should we go about it?
Yeah, I think that's one of the most tragic things that's ever happened. You look at oxycodone, OxyContin in America, the opioid epidemic that's happened there, and you've got people who are taking drugs that was prescribed to them by their doctors and taking them as they were prescribed, getting them addicted to very, very potent opioids. I think that's reprehensible. And as you say, I live in Oxford. They still have the Sackler name. The Sackler's the company that the family that owned Purdue Pharma that caused the opioid epidemic in America. And every time I go and take my daughter to the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, I really want to chip off where it says the Sackler wing, because these people are awful and we shouldn't be celebrating them. So I think it's really tragic. And I have met far too many people. And to be honest with you, the drug industry they've got previous with this. They invented heroin. Bayer invented heroin in the 1910s. And they went, isn't it great? Nobody will have a problem with opium anymore because we've invented a non-addictive drug called heroin. That's why they called it heroin, because it was going to save everyone. And then, all of the Librium and Valiums, they all came out in the 60s. And the drug companies that invented them said, we've got these great drugs. They're totally and utterly not addictive. And then, of course, everybody got addicted to them. And Purdue Pharma just did exactly the same thing with oxycodone. So I think the drug companies, they have a massive responsibility. And doctors take far too much of their education from drug companies. So I think there's a lot of systematic problems that we have. I was working with somebody, still working with them, they basically developed an alcohol problem because they were prescribed barbiturates in a very, very irresponsible way. They were prescribed it by a proper medical doctor with a proper license and everything. They were prescribed a dose that was far too big for them. They got to the point where they'd become addicted to them. They told the doctor that. The doctor just cut off their supply, didn't taper them down, didn't do anything to withdraw them from that, just cut off the supply, and they started drinking because alcohol and barbiturates basically use the same bit of your brain. It's the same pathway. So there's a massive amount of cross addiction with things like that. And that's just, that's just one example. So yeah, I think I've pretty much put the boot into everybody now, haven't I? The food industry, the alcohol industry, tobacco industry, medical industry. Have I insulted politicians yet? Oh, probably.
Okay. Is there anything you would like our listeners to take from this interview? Anything special that they need to remember, and how they should go about their addiction? How should they first recognize their addiction? And then we already talked that they should use a book or just get a coach.
So if you think you've got a problem, then you have. It's that simple. But you know what? You don't need alcohol. You don't need cigarettes. You don't need junk food. You don't need drugs. You don't need any of that because you are enough. You're a complete human being and you never needed any of it. And you have everything inside you that you need to get free. Okay.
Thank you very much, Duncan, for this lovely interview and for being my guest tonight.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. And, if people want to look me up on the internet, if you can spell Bhaskaran Brown, I'm pretty easy to find. I'd love to connect. This is my mission in life. I live to help people. So drop me a line and I will do everything I can to help you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Faleskini, for this outstanding podcast. And thank you for listening to the Ask Faleskini podcast until the end. Mr. Faleskini would love to hear your feedback in the comments. And don't forget, if you want to know, ask Faleskini or listen to the Ask Faleskini podcast. In order to please the almighty algorithm, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.